That Christmas evening, my daughter gave gifts to every person at her table. Neighbors, in-laws. Even the mailman got a bottle of wine. But when she looked at me, her own father, she just laughed. "Oh, Daddy, we forgot about you." The room laughed with her. They all thought I was just a lonely old piano maker with nothing left. They had no idea what Catherine had hidden in the last song she ever wrote. My name is Harold Simmons. I am 71 years old, and I have spent 43 of those years building pianos by hand in a small workshop behind my house in Savannah, Georgia. Every instrument I ever made started the same way. I would walk into the lumber yard before sunrise, run my fingers across planks of spruce and maple, and wait until the wood told me what it wanted to become. People thought that was strange. Catherine never did. She used to sit on a stool in the corner of my shop, barefoot, humming something soft while I worked. She said the best pianos were not built. They were listened into existence. She was right about most things. I did not realize how right until the night everything fell apart. I had driven 45 minutes to reach Nicole's house that evening. The roads were damp, and the Spanish moss hung low over the live oaks like wet curtains. I had spent 3 weeks choosing gifts for everyone. For Melody, my granddaughter, I found a first-edition collection of Chopin nocturnes from a shop in Charleston. For Nicole, I picked a silver brooch shaped like a magnolia blossom, almost identical to one Catherine used to wear on Sunday mornings. For Brandon, Nicole's husband, I wrapped a handcrafted pour-over coffee set because he once mentioned he liked trying new roasts. None of these gifts were expensive, but each one carried a story. I thought that still mattered. Nicole opened the front door with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She wore a green velvet dress and Catherine's jasmine and cedar perfume. The scent hit me like a fist. I had not smelled it since the morning Catherine died, when I pressed my face into her pillow and breathed in what was left of her. Now it floated off my daughter's neck, like she had borrowed something sacred without asking. The house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Garlands wrapped around every banister. A 12-foot Douglas fir stood in the living room, covered in gold ornaments and white lights. Candles flickered on the mantel beside a photograph of Catherine that I had never seen before, framed in silver. The table was set for 14. Crystal glasses, linen napkins folded into swans. Everything was polished. Everything was perfect. Everything was for show. I placed my small bag of wrapped gifts near the door and sat in the chair closest to the kitchen. Melody was already there. She was 16, quiet, and had her grandmother's dark eyes. She watched everything the way Catherine used to, not missing a single detail but never saying a word until it mattered. She nodded at me once, and I nodded back. The gift exchange began after dinner. Brandon went first. He unwrapped a set of titanium golf clubs and held them up like trophies. Nicole received diamond earrings from Brandon, and she kissed him on the cheek while the neighbors clapped. The two couples from across the street got bourbon and gift cards. The mailman, a man named Gerald who had been delivering letters on our road for 11 years, received a bottle of Pinot Noir and shook Brandon's hand like he had just been knighted. Melody opened a box from her parents. Inside was a portable digital keyboard, still in plastic. She turned it over once, set it aside, and looked at me. I understood. A digital keyboard to a girl raised on a handmade Steinway was like giving a painter a coloring book. Then the room went quiet. Not silent. Just that particular kind of quiet that happens when people realize someone has been forgotten. Nicole looked at me from across the table. She pressed 2 fingers to her lips, tilted her head, and said, "Oh, Daddy, we completely forgot about you." She said it the way someone apologizes for forgetting to water a plant. Casual, light, almost amused. The room laughed. Not cruelly, not exactly, but the kind of laughter that fills an awkward space and makes the person standing in it feel even smaller. Brandon leaned back in his chair and added, with a grin that showed too many teeth, "Well, some people contribute, and some people just show up." Nobody corrected him. Nobody looked at me. The neighbors studied their bourbon. Gerald examined his wine label. Nicole turned to refill her glass. I sat there with my hands in my lap, feeling the weight of every year I had spent sanding wood and tuning strings, and believing that a life built with patience would be respected in the end. I reached for my coat. My fingers found the collar, and I started to stand. That was when it happened. Melody pushed her chair back. The legs scraped against the hardwood floor, and the sound cut through the laughter like a wire snapping. She stood up straight, shoulders squared, chin lifted. Her dark eyes locked onto Nicole, with an expression I had seen only once before. On the morning Catherine told her oncologist she would not be afraid. It was not anger. It was not sadness. It was certainty. The kind of certainty that comes right before someone changes the direction of a room. Melody looked at me. Then she looked at her mother. And she did not sit back down. Melody did not say a word at that table. She just stood there, staring at her mother with those dark, unblinking eyes, until Nicole looked away first. Then Melody walked around the table, took my coat from my hands, hung it back on the hook by the door, and whispered something so quietly that only I could hear it. "Grandpa, do not leave yet. There is something you need to know about the music box." I did not understand. Not then. Catherine's music box was a small walnut case, no bigger than a cigar box, with a hand-carved magnolia blossom on the lid. I had built it for her on our 5th anniversary. Inside, a tiny brass cylinder played 8 bars of a melody she had hummed the first night we danced in the kitchen. It had sat on her nightstand for 31 years. After she died, I moved it to mine. I wound it every evening before bed, the way some people say prayers. But Melody's eyes told me something was wrong. She squeezed my wrist once, hard, then walked back to her seat as if nothing had happened. The rest of the evening moved the way bad dreams do, slow and sharp at the same time. Nicole poured more wine. Brandon told a story about a golf trip to Hilton Head that no one had asked about. The neighbors laughed on cue. I sat in my chair and smiled when I was supposed to smile. But my mind had already left the room. It was back in my bedroom, on the nightstand, where the music box should have been. I drove home at 9:45. The roads were empty. Fog had rolled in from the river, and the headlights of my truck cut through it like 2 dull knives. Spanish moss brushed the roof as I turned onto my road. The house was dark. I had left the porch light on, but the bulb must have burned out while I was gone. I sat in the driveway for a long time. Engine running. Hands on the wheel. Listening to the engine tick and thinking about what Melody had said. Inside, the house smelled the way it always did. Lemon oil and old wood, and the faintest trace of cedar from the workshop out back. I hung my coat on the chair by the kitchen table, poured a glass of water, and stood at the sink looking out the window at the dark shape of the workshop. Catherine's shadow was everywhere in this house. The cookbooks she had arranged by color on the shelf above the stove. The pencil marks on the doorframe where she had tracked Melody's height every summer. The chipped mug with the painted hummingbird that she refused to throw away because she said broken things still hold warmth. I walked to the bedroom. The nightstand was on the left side of the bed, where Catherine had always slept. I reached for the music box the way I did every night, already feeling the smooth walnut grain beneath my fingers before I touched it. It was not there. I pulled the drawer open. I checked behind the lamp. I knelt down and looked under the bed, pressing my cheek against the cold hardwood floor. Nothing. The music box was gone. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to think clearly. I had wounded it 2 nights ago. I remembered the sound of the tiny brass pins plucking the comb. 8 bars of that melody. Catherine humming along in my memory as if she were sitting right beside me. The box had been there. I was certain someone had taken it. The thought arrived slowly, the way cracks spread through wood. Not with a snap, but with a long, quiet splitting that you feel more than hear. Someone had been in my house. Someone had walked into my bedroom, stood where Catherine used to stand, and taken the one object that held her voice. I could not sleep. I sat in the armchair by the window, and watched the street until the sky turned from black to gray to pale gold. The live oaks outside shifted in the early wind. A mockingbird started singing from the magnolia tree in the front yard, running through its stolen catalog of other birds' songs, one after another, never landing on its own. At 6 in the morning I made coffee. Strong, black, 2 spoonfuls of sugar, the way Catherine taught me when we were both 23, and living in a rented apartment above a bakery on Broughton Street. The mug warmed my hands. I drank slowly and tried to list every person who had a key to my house. Nicole had one. Brandon, by extension, had access to it. Melody had one, but she would not have taken the box. She loved it. She used to press her ear against the lid when she was small and say she could hear her grandmother breathing inside. That left Nicole. Or Brandon. Or both. I set the mug down and walked to the workshop. The double doors creaked when I pushed them open. Inside, half-finished soundboards leaned against the walls. Clamps and chisels hung from pegboard racks. The Steinway sat in the center of the room under a canvas cover, massive and patient, like a sleeping animal. I pulled back the cover and ran my hand across the fallboard. The wood was cool and smooth. This piano had been Catherine's favorite. She called it the cathedral because she said playing it felt like praying. I lifted the fallboard and pressed a single key. Middle C. The note filled the workshop the way water fills a glass, steady and complete. I held it until the sound faded into the rafters, and then I closed the lid. My phone buzzed at 7:15. I pulled it from my pocket and looked at the screen. The message was from a number I did not recognize. It read, in plain text with no greeting and no signature, 3 words that made my hands go still. Check the piano. I stared at those 3 words until the screen dimmed. Check the piano. I read them again. Then, a 3rd time. The letters did not change, but something in my chest did. It was the feeling I used to get when I pressed my ear against a freshly strung soundboard and heard the first vibration travel through the wood. A signal. Faint, but unmistakable. I did not check the piano. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone on the workbench and walked back to the kitchen. Whoever sent that message wanted me to act fast, and 43 years of building instruments had taught me one thing about rushing. You ruin the piece. Every time. At 8:30, the doorbell rang. I opened it and found Melody standing on the porch with her backpack over one shoulder and a brown paper bag in her hand. She held up the bag. Biscuits from Clary's. I told Mom I was going to the library. She walked past me into the kitchen, set the bag on the table, and sat down as if she had done this 100 times. In a way, she had. Before Catherine died, Melody used to come over every Saturday morning. Catherine would make shrimp and grits, and the 3 of us would eat at this table while the radio played something old and slow. After Catherine was gone, Melody kept coming. She never said it was because she was worried about me. She just showed up with food and sat in her grandmother's chair. I poured her a glass of orange juice and sat across from her. She did not touch the biscuits. She was looking at me the way she had looked at Nicole the night before. Steady. Serious. Older than 16. Grandpa, she said, I need to tell you what I heard. I waited. 3 weeks ago, she began. I was in my room studying for a history exam. It was almost midnight. Mom and Brandon were in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. Their voices came through the vent above my desk, the one that connects to the kitchen ceiling. I have heard conversations through that vent my whole life. Usually it is just noise. But that night, I heard my name, and I heard yours. She paused and took a breath. Brandon said they needed to move faster. He said the house, your house, was worth more than $2 million. And the piano collection was worth at least that much again. He said you were getting older, and that it would be easy to file for conservatorship if they could prove you were not capable of managing your own affairs. Mom did not argue. She said she had already spoken to someone, a lawyer, about starting the paperwork after the new year. I felt the words settle into me, the way cold settles into stone. Slowly, completely, without any place left untouched. Melody reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She smoothed it flat on the table and pushed it toward me. It was a printed email, dated 3 weeks earlier, from Nicole's personal account, to an address I did not recognize. The subject line read, Re. Simmons Estate. Initial consultation. The body of the email was short. It listed my full name, my date of birth, the address of my house, and a brief description of my assets. At the bottom, in bold, Nicole had written, "He has no idea about any of it. Father is cooperative but confused." Should be straightforward. Cooperative but confused. I read those words twice. I had built over 300 pianos in my lifetime. I could still tune a concert grand by ear in under 40 minutes. I balanced my own checkbook, paid my own taxes, and cooked my own meals every night. Cooperative but confused. That was how my daughter described me to a stranger. Melody watched me read. When I looked up, she reached into the backpack again and pulled out her phone. She opened the photo gallery and turned the screen toward me. The first image showed Nicole standing in my bedroom next to my nightstand, holding the walnut music box. The timestamp read December 21st, 4 days before Christmas. The second image showed Nicole walking out of my house with the box tucked under her arm, her car keys in the other hand. I took the photos, Melody said quietly. I was sitting in the car. Mom told me to wait while she picked something up from your house. She said you had asked her to get it. I knew that was not true, because you never let anyone touch that box. So I took pictures. I set the phone down on the table. My hands were steady, but something inside me was not. It was the feeling of hearing a note that does not belong in the chord, a dissonance so sharp it changes the entire shape of the music. Grandpa, Melody said. There is one more thing. She pulled out a second folded paper. This one was different. It was not a printout. It was a photocopy of a handwritten sheet of music, 12 bars, written in pencil, on staff paper. The handwriting was Catherine's. I would have recognized it from across a room. She wrote her notes the same way she wrote everything else, small, precise, with a slight forward lean, as if the music was in a hurry to arrive. At the top of the page, in Catherine's hand, were 2 words. For Harold. Grandma emailed this to me 6 months before she died, Melody said. She told me to keep it safe and to give it to you only when you needed it. She said I would know when. I looked at the music. I could hear it in my head, the way I could hear any written score, the notes assembling themselves into sound without a single key being pressed. But there was something else in the notation, something tucked between the bars that did not look like music at all. Melody leaned forward. There is also a name in the music. Grandpa. Hidden in the note sequence. She pointed to a series of letters, penciled faintly beneath the staff. D-O-L-O-R-E-S. Do you know anyone named Dolores? Dolores. The name sat in my mouth like a chord I had forgotten how to play. I knew it. I was certain I knew it. But the connection was buried under years of sawdust and grief and daily routines that had slowly sanded my memory smooth. Melody watched me. She did not push. She just waited, the way Catherine used to wait when she asked me a question and could see the answer forming behind my eyes before I found the words. Then it came. Not all at once, but in pieces, like a melody, returning note by note. Dolores Vega. She owned a small music shop on West Liberty Street near Forsyth Park. The shop was called Magnolia Sound. Catherine used to go there every Thursday afternoon. She told me it was to browse sheet music, maybe pick up new strings for the upright in the living room. I never questioned it. Catherine had 100 quiet rituals, and I loved every one of them, even the ones I did not fully understand. After Catherine died, I stopped going to that part of town. There was no reason to walk past the places she had loved. Every storefront, every sidewalk, every bench carried her shape. And I was not strong enough to keep meeting her ghost on every corner. I told Melody I would go alone. She did not argue, but she made me promise to call her the moment I left the shop. I promised. Then I put on my coat, tucked the sheet music into my inside pocket, and drove downtown. Magnolia Sound sat between a used bookstore and a cafe that smelled like burnt sugar. The shop front was narrow, painted dark green, with a single window displaying a vintage cello and a stack of yellowed songbooks. A brass bell rang when I pushed the door open. Inside, the shop was deeper than it looked. Shelves lined both walls, packed tight with sheet music, vinyl records, instrument cases, and glass jars filled with guitar picks sorted by color. A Martin acoustic hung from the ceiling by fishing line, rotating slowly in the draft from a floor vent. The air smelled like rosin and old paper and something floral that I could not name. A woman stepped out from behind a curtain at the back. She was perhaps 65, with silver-streaked black hair pulled into a loose bun, reading glasses pushed up onto her forehead, and hands that moved the way musicians' hands do, always slightly restless, always reaching for something to hold. She looked at me, and her face changed. Not with surprise, with recognition. "You must be Harold," she said. "I have been waiting a long time for you to walk through that door." She introduced herself as Dolores Vega. She said she and Catherine had been close friends for nearly 15 years. They met at a community piano recital in 2008, when Catherine played a piece that made Dolores cry in the second row. After that, they started meeting every Thursday. Catherine would come to the shop, and they would spend 2 or 3 hours together. Sometimes they played music. Sometimes they just talked. Dolores said Catherine called those afternoons her tuning sessions because they helped her stay in key with herself. I asked why Catherine had never mentioned her. Dolores smiled. But it was the kind of smile that holds sadness, the way a cracked cup holds water. Carefully, and not for long. "Catherine wanted to tell you," she said. "But the secret was not just about me. It was about what she was building, and she needed it to stay hidden until the right moment." Dolores led me to a small back room behind the curtain. It was an office, cluttered but warm, with a roll-top desk, a filing cabinet, and a framed photograph on the wall showing Catherine and Dolores standing side by side in front of this very shop, both of them laughing. I stared at that photograph for a long time. Catherine looked happy in a way I recognized but could not place. It was the happiness of someone doing something they believed in. Dolores opened the filing cabinet and pulled out a thick manila folder. She set it on the desk and looked at me. "Harold," she said. "Did Catherine ever tell you she was a composer?" The question did not make sense. Catherine played piano beautifully, yes. She hummed melodies constantly. She filled notebooks with what I assumed were personal reflections. But a composer? She had never once mentioned writing music professionally. Dolores opened the folder. Inside were dozens of pages. Copyright registrations, licensing agreements, royalty statements. All of them listed the same author name. C. Magnolia. Catherine published under a pen name, Dolores said. She started writing seriously about 12 years ago. Small pieces at first, for independent films and podcasts, then longer works. A score for a documentary that won a regional Emmy. 2 pieces licensed to a streaming platform for a drama series. A lullaby that was recorded by a children's choir in Atlanta and played on public radio stations across the Southeast. I turned the pages slowly. Each document was dated, signed, and notarized. The royalty statements showed deposits going back over a decade, all flowing into an account I had never seen. The total, Dolores said, watching my face, is $1.6 million. Catherine set up a trust. She named it the C. Magnolia Trust. The trustee is a lawyer named Nathaniel Carr. Catherine's instructions were very specific. The money was not to be touched until you needed it. And I was supposed to be the one to tell you. She reached into the folder and pulled out a small red envelope, sealed with wax. On the front, in Catherine's handwriting, it said, "For Harold. Open with Nathaniel." "There is one more thing," Dolores said. She looked toward the curtain as if checking that no one else was listening. Then she leaned closer. Catherine left a recording. Her voice. "She hid it inside your Steinway. I drove home faster than I should have." The streets of Savannah blurred past the windows like watercolor paintings left out in the rain. Live oaks. Iron fences. Gas lanterns flickering on Bull Street. I did not see any of it. All I could see was the Steinway sitting in the center of my workshop, silent and enormous, holding something Catherine had placed inside it and never told me about. I parked in the driveway and walked straight past the house. The workshop doors groaned when I pushed them open. The air inside was cold and still, thick with the smell of lacquer and aged spruce. Sawdust particles floated in the thin light that came through the high windows. I pulled the canvas cover off the Steinway and stood there for a moment, my hands resting on the rim, feeling the smooth black lacquer beneath my palms. This piano was the finest instrument I had ever built. It took me 14 months. I selected every piece of wood myself. The soundboard was Sitka spruce from Alaska, aged for 7 years. The rim was hard rock maple, bent and laminated by hand over a period of 3 weeks. I voiced every hammer individually, adjusting the felt with needles until each note sang with its own distinct character. Catherine sat with me during the final voicing. She played scales while I listened, and together we shaped the sound the way sculptors shape clay. Slowly, carefully, one small adjustment at a time. She called this piano the cathedral. She said playing it felt like praying. And now I understood that she had hidden something sacred inside it. I opened the fallboard and looked at the keys. 88 of them, white and black, perfectly aligned. I pressed a few notes at random. The sound filled the workshop and died away like breath leaving a body. I ran my fingers along the underside of the keyboard, feeling for anything unusual. Nothing. I checked the music rack, the hinges, the lid prop. Nothing. Then I remembered what Melody had said. The sheet music. The hidden code. D. O. L. O. R. E. S. But there had been something else in the notation that I had not paid attention to at the time. A small marking above the 7th bar. A tiny arrow pointing downward, and beside it, in Catherine's microscopic handwriting, the number 3. Third hammer from middle C. I found middle C and counted 3 hammers to the right. E above middle C. I reached into the action mechanism, my fingers moving carefully between the wooden shanks and felt-covered heads. The space was tight, barely wide enough for 2 fingers. I felt along the hammer rail, past the repetition lever, down to the flange, and there, wedged between the flange and the rail, wrapped in a small piece of black velvet, was something that did not belong inside a piano. I pulled it out slowly. The velvet was soft and slightly dusty. I unfolded it on the workbench. Inside was a USB drive, matte black, no larger than my thumbnail. Taped to the velvet was a small square of paper with Catherine's handwriting. It said, "Play this when you are ready. Not before." My hands were trembling. I noticed that the way you notice rain after you are already soaked. It was not fear. It was the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast, something that had been waiting for me in the dark for years. Patient and silent, the way only love can wait. I went into the house and sat at the kitchen table. I opened my laptop, the old one Catherine and I had shared, the one with the hummingbird sticker she had put on the corner. I inserted the USB drive. A single folder appeared on the screen. It was labeled C. Magnolia, Final Collection. Inside were 2 files. The first was an audio recording, 47 minutes long, dated 8 months before Catherine died. The second was a document titled, "For Harold, Instructions." I opened the audio file. Catherine's voice filled the kitchen. "Harold," she said. If you are hearing this, then Dolores kept her promise, and Melody kept hers, and you found your way to the piano. I always knew you would. You have never been able to leave a mystery inside an instrument unsolved. She laughed softly. It was her real laugh, the one that came from somewhere deep in her chest, not the polite one she used at dinner parties. I closed my eyes. For a moment, she was sitting across from me at this table, barefoot, holding her chipped hummingbird mug, the morning light catching the silver in her hair. I need to tell you some things, she continued. Things I should have told you while I was still sitting in that chair across from you. But I was afraid. Not of you. Never of you. I was afraid that if I told you what I knew, you would try to fix it too soon. And the people who needed to be caught would slip away. She paused. I could hear her breathing. Somewhere in the background of the recording, a mockingbird was singing. Our daughter is planning to take everything from you, Harold. The house. The pianos. Your dignity. She has been planning it for a long time, and she has help. I do not say this to hurt you. I say this because I love you, and because I spent the last 2 years of my life making sure she would not succeed. The recording continued, but I pressed pause. I needed a moment. The kitchen was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. The clock above the stove ticked. Outside, the wind moved through the magnolia tree, and the branches scratched against the window the way fingers scratch against a door when they want to be let in. I looked at the red envelope Dolores had given me. For Harold. Open with Nathaniel. I picked up my phone and dialed the number written on the back of the envelope. A man answered on the second ring. Nathaniel Carr speaking. Nathaniel Carr's office was on the 3rd floor of a sandstone building on Drayton Street, 3 blocks from the courthouse. The stairwell was narrow, and the wooden steps creaked in a rhythm that reminded me of an old upright with worn-out dampers. A brass plate on the door read, Carr and Associates, Estate and Elder Law. I turned the handle and walked in. The waiting room was small and deliberate. 2 leather chairs, a glass table with a single orchid, framed diplomas on the wall. No magazines, no television, no distractions. The receptionist, a young woman with braided hair and reading glasses, looked up and said my name before I said a word. Mr. Simmons. He is expecting you. Second door on the left. Nathaniel Carr stood when I entered his office. He was perhaps 50. Tall, lean, with close-cropped gray hair, and the kind of posture that comes from either military service or a lifetime of standing in courtrooms. His handshake was firm but not aggressive. His desk was clean. A single file sat in the center, thick and tabbed with colored markers. He gestured to the chair across from him, and I sat down. Harold, he said. Catherine told me this day would come. I just did not know when. He opened the file. The first page was a letter from Catherine, dated 14 months before her death, authorizing Nathaniel as the sole trustee of the Sea Magnolia Trust. The second page was the trust document itself. 23 pages, notarized and witnessed. I did not understand every legal phrase, but Nathaniel walked me through it line by line, the way a teacher walks a student through a difficult score. The trust held $1.6 million in royalty income from Catherine's compositions. The money had been accumulating for over a decade, deposited automatically from licensing agreements managed by Dolores. Catherine's instructions were precise. The principal was to remain untouched unless Harold Simmons faced a direct legal or financial threat from a family member. In that event, Nathaniel was authorized to activate the trust's defensive provisions and use whatever legal means necessary to protect Harold's assets, dignity, and autonomy. I asked Nathaniel why Catherine had built this. He leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. She came to me 11 years ago, he said. She had discovered that Nicole and Brandon were spending beyond their means. Credit cards. A second mortgage Nicole did not tell you about. Small withdrawals from a joint account Catherine shared with Nicole for household emergencies. Nothing dramatic at first, But Catherine was a pattern thinker. She saw where it was heading before anyone else did. He turned to a section near the back of the file. 2 documents were flagged in red. The first was a photocopy of a power of attorney form, pre-filled with my name and Nicole's name, unsigned. The second was a draft petition for conservatorship, also unsigned, prepared by a law firm in Pooler, Georgia. Both documents had been found by Catherine in Nicole's home office during a visit 3 years ago. Catherine photographed them and brought them to me, Nathaniel said. That was when we moved from planning to building. Building. He used that word deliberately, and I understood it. Catherine had not simply written a will or opened a savings account. She had constructed a legal architecture around me, the way I would construct the frame of a piano. Every joint was glued and clamped. Every brace was placed where stress would be greatest. She had anticipated the forces that would try to tear it apart and reinforce the structure before those forces arrived. Nathaniel explained the 4 layers of protection. Layer 1 was the trust itself. $1.6 million. Legally separate from my personal assets, inaccessible to Nicole or anyone acting on her behalf. Layer 2 was the estate shield. Catherine had worked with Nathaniel to restructure the ownership of my house and the piano collection. Both were now held in a family-limited partnership. With Nathaniel as the managing partner, Nicole could not sell, mortgage, or transfer any part of the estate without his written approval. Layer 3 was the evidence archive. Catherine had spent 2 years documenting Nicole's financial behavior, bank statements showing unauthorized withdrawals, emails between Nicole and Brandon discussing my assets, photographs of documents Nicole had prepared without my knowledge. All of this was stored in a secure vault at Nathaniel's office, organized chronologically and cross-referenced. Layer 4 was the audio file. Catherine's 47-minute recording, which I had only begun to hear, contained a detailed, narrated account of everything she had discovered, along with her explicit statement that she was of sound mind and acting voluntarily. Nathaniel said this recording, combined with the documentary evidence, would be sufficient to block any conservatorship petition and, if necessary, to file criminal charges for attempted elder financial abuse. I sat in that chair for a long time after he finished. The orchid in the waiting room was visible through the open door, white and still, balanced perfectly on its stem. I thought about Catherine in this office, sitting where I sat, planning all of this while I was at home sanding a piano lid and believing that the world was simple and good and that my daughter loved me the way I loved her. She did love you, Nathaniel said, as if he had read my mind. Not Nicole. Catherine. She loved you enough to spend the last years of her life building a fortress around yours. He slid a card across the desk. On it was a name and a phone number. Garrett Webb, licensed private investigator. Catherine arranged this as well, Nathaniel said. Garrett has been monitoring Nicole and Brandon's financial activity for the past 9 months. He has something you need to see. But first, Harold, I need to ask you a question. He looked at me directly. There is a 19-day window. Nicole's attorney has filed preliminary paperwork for a competency evaluation. If they complete it, a judge could grant temporary conservatorship within 3 weeks. We have 19 days to file a preemptive challenge. Do you want to fight this? I thought of Catherine's voice on the recording. I thought of Melody standing up at that dinner table. I thought of the music box, stolen from my nightstand in the dark. Yes, I said. I want to fight. That evening, Melody came to the house after school. She did not knock. She never did. She walked through the back door, dropped her backpack on the kitchen floor, and found me sitting at the table with the sheet music spread out in front of me. The 12 bars Catherine had written. The ones with Dolores's name hidden in the note sequence. I had been staring at them for an hour, and I still felt like I was reading a letter in a language I only half understood. Melody pulled a chair beside me and leaned in. She smelled like pencil shavings and the lavender hand cream her grandmother used to keep in the bathroom. She studied the music for a long time without speaking. Then she pulled a notebook from her backpack and a mechanical pencil and began writing. She worked the way Catherine worked. Silently, completely, with a focus that shut out everything else in the room. I watched her translate each note into its letter name. In standard musical notation, the notes correspond to letters A through G. Catherine had used this as the foundation of her code, but she had added a second layer. Every accidental, every sharp and flat, shifted the letter forward or backward in the alphabet. A sharp on C became D. A flat on E became D. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. Melody filled 2 pages of her notebook with letters, crossing out mistakes, circling clusters that formed words. After 40 minutes, she set the pencil down and turned the notebook toward me. The first decoded line read, "Third hammer, from middle C." I already knew that. That was where I had found the USB drive. But Melody pointed to the second line, which I had not reached in my own listening. It read, "Second pedal, left screw, turn twice." I looked at Melody. She looked at me. Then we both looked toward the workshop door. We walked out together. The night air was cool and damp, carrying the smell of river mud and magnolia blossoms. The workshop lights buzzed when I flipped the switch. The Steinway sat where it always sat, uncovered now, its black surface reflecting the overhead bulbs like still water. A grand piano has 3 pedals. The left pedal is the una corda, the soft pedal. It shifts the entire action mechanism to the right, so that each hammer strikes fewer strings. I knelt down on the floor and looked underneath the pedal lyre. The lyre is the brass frame that holds the pedals in place, bolted to the bottom of the piano with heavy screws. I found the left screw on the una corda pedal and turned it counterclockwise. Once, twice. The screw loosened, but it did not come out. Instead, a small panel at the base of the lyre shifted open, no wider than a playing card. I reached inside with 2 fingers and felt something smooth and flat. I pulled it out carefully. It was a second USB drive, identical to the first, wrapped in the same black velvet. But this one had a small adhesive label on the back, written in Catherine's hand. It said, "The rest of the story." Melody and I went back to the kitchen. I inserted the drive into the laptop. This time, the folder contained 3 files. The first was an audio recording, 22 minutes long. The second was a PDF document, 14 pages. The third was a video file, 3 minutes and 41 seconds, dated 5 months before Catherine died. I opened the audio file first, Catherine's voice again. But this time, she was not calm. She spoke quickly, with an urgency I had only heard once before. On the night, she called me from the hospital to tell me the cancer had spread. "Harold," she said, "if you have found this, then you have already been to Nathaniel's office, and you already know about the trust. What I am about to tell you is the part I could not put in the legal documents. This is the part that is just between you and me." She told me that Nicole had been stealing from us for 6 years. It started small, a few $100s from the emergency account, a forged signature on a check. Then it grew. Nicole had taken out a second credit card in Catherine's name, without her knowledge, and charged over $28,000. When Catherine confronted her, Nicole denied it. Then, she cried. Then she said it was Brandon's idea. Then she stopped returning Catherine's calls for 3 months. Catherine said she forgave Nicole, but she did not trust her again. The PDF document was a detailed financial record Catherine had compiled over 4 years. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every forged document, every lie, dated and sourced. It was organized the way I would organize a piano specification sheet, meticulous, sequential, and impossible to misread. Page 11 showed a charge on Catherine's stolen credit card for a consultation fee at the law firm in Pooler, the same firm that had prepared the unsigned conservatorship petition. Nicole had used Catherine's own credit card to pay for legal advice on how to take control of my life. I closed the document and sat very still. Melody was watching me. She had not read the files. She did not need to. She could see it all on my face. "Grandpa," she said softly, "there is still the video." I looked at the third file. 3 minutes and 41 seconds. I was not sure I was ready. But Catherine's words from the first recording echoed in my head. "Play this when you are ready, not before." I pressed play. The screen showed Catherine sitting at the Steinway in my workshop. She was thin. Her hair was covered by a blue scarf. Her hands rested on the keys, and the light from the high windows fell across her shoulders like a shawl. She looked directly into the camera and smiled. "Hello, my love," she said. "I wrote you something new. It is the last piece I will ever write. I called it, For Harold, After the Storm." She turned to the keys and began to play. I watched Catherine play that piece 3 times. Each time, I noticed something I had missed before. The way her left hand trembled slightly on the low notes. The way she closed her eyes during the bridge, as if the melody was carrying her somewhere she had already been. The way she paused at the final chord, held it for 3 full seconds, then looked into the camera and whispered, "Now go build something beautiful." The screen went black. I closed the laptop. The kitchen was dark, except for the light above the stove, and the clock read 11:14. Melody had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room. Her backpack still on the floor, her shoes still on. I covered her with the quilt Catherine had made from old concert shirts and sat in the armchair until morning. At 9 the next day, I called Garrett Webb. He answered on the first ring, as if he had been holding the phone, waiting for this exact call. His voice was low, even, and direct. The kind of voice that wastes nothing. "Mr. Simmons, Nathaniel told me you would be reaching out. I have been working your case for 9 months. Can you meet me at noon?" We met at a diner on Habersham Street. A narrow place with checkered floors and ceiling fans that wobbled with every rotation. Garrett was already in the back booth when I arrived. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 40, with a shaved head, a short beard, and hands that wrapped around his coffee mug the way a mechanic holds a wrench, with familiarity and without ceremony. A brown leather satchel sat on the seat beside him. He did not shake my hand. He did not smile. He simply nodded at the chair across from him and said, "Sit down, Harold. This is going to take a while." Garrett opened the satchel and pulled out a folder nearly as thick as the one Nathaniel had shown me. But where Nathaniel's file was clean and organized, Garrett's was raw. Photographs printed on plain paper, handwritten notes in the margins, bank statements highlighted in 3 different colors, phone records with circled numbers and arrows connecting them. He started with Brandon. "Brandon Hale," he said. 44 years old. Insurance adjuster by day. Online gambler by night. He has accounts on 6 different platforms, 4 domestic and 2 offshore. In the past 3 years, he has lost $190,000. He refinanced his car twice. He took out a personal loan of $35,000 from a lender in Jacksonville that charges 23% interest. He is 4 months behind on that loan. He has a lien on a boat he bought in 2022 and never registered. Garrett laid the bank statements on the table, side by side, like a hand of cards. The withdrawals were consistent and escalating. $500 here, $1,000 there, then $3,000, then $5,000. The pattern was unmistakable. It was the pattern of a man who keeps doubling down because he believes the next hand will save him. "Nicole knows," Garrett continued. "She has co-signed 2 of the loans. Her name is on the offshore account in Antigua. She transferred $12,000 from a joint savings account into that account last March. The savings account was originally funded by Catherine for Melody's college education. He let that settle." I said nothing. The ceiling fan wobbled above us, and a waitress refilled our coffee without being asked. Garrett pulled out a second set of documents. These were printouts of text messages between Nicole and Brandon, obtained through legal channels that Garrett did not explain, and I did not ask about. The messages were dated over a 6-month period. In them, Nicole and Brandon discussed my house, my piano collection, and my mental state with the casual efficiency of two people dividing inventory. One message from Brandon, dated October 15th, read, "If we get the conservatorship by February, we can list the house by spring. Market's good. 2.1 easy." Nicole's reply, sent 4 minutes later, read, "The pianos are the real money. I talked to a dealer in New York. He said the Steinway alone could go for $300,000. Dad doesn't even know what he has. I knew exactly what I had. I had built every one of those instruments with my own hands. I knew the grain of every soundboard, the tension of every string, the precise weight of every key." My daughter was not talking about selling pianos. She was talking about dismantling 43 years of my life and converting it into numbers on a screen that would disappear into Brandon's gambling accounts within a year. Garrett was watching me. He reached into the satchel one final time and pulled out a small digital recorder. He placed it on the table between us. "There is one more thing," he said. "Last Tuesday, I had a conversation with Brandon. He did not know he was being recorded. Georgia is a one-party consent state, so the recording is admissible." He pressed play. Brandon's voice came through the tiny speaker, slightly distorted but unmistakable. He was talking to someone, a man whose voice I did not recognize. "The old man is easy," Brandon said. "He just sits in that shop and plays with wood all day. Nicole's got him wrapped up. Once we get the paperwork through, we sell the house, liquidate the pianos, and we are clear. 6 months, tops. He will be in assisted living before he even knows what happened." The other man laughed. Brandon laughed with him. Garrett pressed stop. He looked at me across the table. "Harold," he said, "I need to be honest with you. They are moving faster than we expected. Nathaniel's 19-day window is accurate. But Brandon has been making calls to a real estate contact in Pooler. If they get temporary conservatorship, they will have access to your accounts within 48 hours. We need to act." He slid a notepad across the table. "I need you to call Nicole tomorrow. Tell her you have been thinking about things. Tell her you want to have the family over for dinner on Saturday. Tell her you want to make things right. Can you do that?" I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. The same hand that had shaped 300 pianos, that had held Catherine's fingers on the last morning of her life, that had wound the music box every single night. "I can do that," I said. I called Nicole the next morning at 8:15. She answered on the 4th ring, which told me she had looked at the screen, considered ignoring it, and decided that picking up was the safer move. Her voice was bright and careful, the way people speak when they are performing kindness rather than feeling it. "Daddy." What a nice surprise. I kept my voice soft, tired, a little uncertain. I told her I had been thinking about Christmas, about the way things had gone, about how much time we had all lost since Catherine died. I told her I wanted to make things right. I said I was planning to cook a big dinner on Saturday evening, the way Catherine used to, and I wanted the whole family there. Nicole, Brandon, Melody. I said I had been lonely, and that was the truth. The lie was everything underneath it. Nicole paused. I could hear her breathing shift. The way a pianist's breathing shifts when they see the next passage is easier than they expected. "Oh, Daddy," she said. "That sounds wonderful. We would love to come." She asked what I was cooking. I told her shrimp and grits, collard greens, cornbread, and Dolores's bread pudding. She did not ask who Dolores was. She did not care. She just said, "That sounds perfect, Daddy. See you Saturday at 6. I hung up and stared at the phone for a long time. Building a trap is not so different from building a piano. You start with the frame. You make sure every joint is precise. Then you add the moving parts, one by one, and you test each mechanism until you are certain it will perform exactly as designed under pressure. The difference is that a piano is built to create beauty. This was built to reveal the truth. But the craftsmanship required was the same. I spent the next 3 days preparing. On Wednesday, I met with Nathaniel at his office. We reviewed the legal documents he would present at the dinner. The trust papers, the estate shield, the conservatorship petition Nicole's attorney had filed, the financial records Catherine had compiled. Nathaniel organized everything into a leather binder with numbered tabs. He would arrive at 5:30 on Saturday, before the others, and wait in the workshop until I gave the signal. On Thursday, I met with Garrett at the diner on Habersham. He brought 2 small cameras, each no larger than a shirt button, and showed me how to position them. One would go on the bookshelf in the living room, angled toward the dining table. The other would sit on the mantel beside Catherine's photograph, facing the front door. Both recorded audio and video simultaneously and transmitted to a secure server in real time. Garrett also brought a backup audio recorder, the size of a cigarette lighter, which I would keep in my shirt pocket. He tested everything twice, and then a third time, because that was the kind of man he was. On Friday morning, I drove to Magnolia Sound. Dolores was arranging a display of vintage harmonicas in the front window when I walked in. She looked at me, and without a word, she walked to the back room and returned with a canvas bag. Inside were the ingredients for Catherine's bread pudding, the recipe that Catherine had perfected over 20 years. Day-old brioche from a bakery on Broughton Street, Madagascar vanilla, brown sugar, heavy cream, bourbon. Dolores said Catherine had made her memorize the recipe and had tested her on it 3 times to make sure she got the ratios right. She also handed me a small card with a phone number and a name, Reverend Thomas Clay. He and his wife, Martha, had been friends of Catherine's. Dolores said Catherine wanted them at the dinner, not as witnesses in the legal sense, but as moral witnesses. People whose presence would remind everyone in the room that the truth has weight. I called Reverend Clay that afternoon. He was a quiet man with a deep voice that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. He listened without interrupting as I explained what was happening. When I finished, he said only 2 things. First, he said, "Martha and I will be there." Second, he said, "Your wife was a remarkable woman, Harold. Do not waste what she built." On Saturday morning, I woke at 5. The house was still dark. I stood in the kitchen and looked out the window at the magnolia tree. Its leaves were thick and waxy and caught the earliest light like green mirrors. Catherine had planted that tree the year Melody was born. She said every child needed a tree to grow up next to, something rooted and patient that would still be standing long after the noise of life had faded. I began cooking at 6. The shrimp came from a fisherman on Tybee Island who had been selling to me for 15 years. I peeled them by hand, slowly, the way Catherine had taught me, pulling the shell from the tail in one clean motion. The grits were stone ground, from a mill in Charleston. I stirred them for 45 minutes, adding butter and sharp cheddar, a little at a time, until they were thick and smooth and steaming. Dolores arrived at 3. She carried the bread pudding in a ceramic dish covered with a linen cloth. She set it on the counter, looked around the kitchen, and touched the chipped hummingbird mug on the shelf. She did not say anything. She did not need to. Nathaniel arrived at 5:30. He parked on the side street and entered through the workshop door. He set up the leather binder on my workbench and reviewed the sequence one final time. First, the trust. Second, the estate records. Third, the conservatorship petition. Fourth, Garrett's recordings. Fifth, Catherine's video. 5 layers. Like 5 coats of lacquer on a piano lid, each one thin and precise, but together, impenetrable. Garrett called at 5:45 to confirm the cameras were active and the server was recording. Reverend Clay and Martha arrived at 5:50. Martha brought a jar of fig preserves and a handshake that was warmer than most hugs. The Reverend stood in the living room and looked at Catherine's photograph on the mantel. He bowed his head for a moment, then sat in the armchair by the window. At 5:58, headlights swept across the front windows. A car door slammed, then another, then a third. I straightened my collar. I touched the recorder in my shirt pocket. I looked at Dolores, and she nodded once. The doorbell rang at exactly 6 o'clock. I opened the door. Nicole stood on the porch in a cream-colored blouse and gold earrings, holding a bottle of white wine the way people hold props in photographs. Behind her, Brandon adjusted his collar and smiled the smile of a man who has already spent the money he has not yet stolen. Melody stood slightly apart from both of them, her hands in her coat pockets, her dark eyes scanning the room behind me the way a musician scans a stage before a performance. "Daddy," Nicole said. "The house looks wonderful." She stepped inside and kissed my cheek. Her lips were cold. Brandon followed, shaking my hand with a grip that lasted a beat too long, the kind of handshake that is meant to communicate authority rather than warmth. Melody came last. She squeezed my arm as she passed, and I felt her fingers press twice, quickly, the way Catherine used to signal me across a crowded room. "I am here. I see everything." Nicole noticed Dolores first. She was standing by the stove, stirring the grits, wearing an apron Catherine had embroidered with small magnolia blossoms. Nicole's smile flickered. "Daddy, who is this?" "An old friend of Catherine's," I said. "Dolores Vega. She has been helping me cook." Nicole studied Dolores the way a cat studies a closed door. She said nothing, but I saw her glance at Brandon. He gave a small shrug, almost invisible, the kind of gesture that means, "Not important. Stay focused." Then Nicole saw Reverend Clay and Martha sitting in the living room. The Reverend stood when she entered and extended his hand. Martha smiled warmly and said how lovely it was to see the family together. Nicole shook their hands and looked at me with a question in her eyes that she was too careful to ask out loud. "Why are these people here?" I told her I had been feeling lonely and wanted the house to feel full again, the way it used to when Catherine was alive. Nicole accepted this. She had no reason not to. In her mind, I was cooperative but confused, a man whose loneliness made him easy to manage. We sat down to eat at 6:20. The table was set for 8. Harold at the head, Nicole and Brandon on the left, Melody beside Brandon, Dolores and Reverend Clay on the right, Martha at the far end. The chair beside me, on the right, was empty. It was Catherine's chair. I had set a plate and a glass of water in front of it, and no one asked why. The food was good. I know it was good because I had spent 6 hours making it, and because cooking was one of the few things Catherine and I had learned to do together, with the same patience we applied to music. The shrimp were sweet and firm. The grits were smooth. The collard greens had just enough vinegar to make the back of your tongue wake up. The cornbread was golden on top and soft in the center. For the first 20 minutes, the dinner moved the way all performances move when the audience does not know they are watching one. Small talk. Compliments about the food. Brandon telling a story about a colleague's fishing trip that had no point and no end. Nicole refilling her wine glass twice. Martha asking Melody about school. The Reverend eating quietly, his large hands folded around his fork like a man accustomed to being still in rooms full of noise. Melody barely spoke. She ate slowly and watched. I knew she was waiting. I was waiting too. At 6:40, I pushed my chair back and stood up. The sound of the chair legs against the hardwood floor was sharp and clean, and it cut through the conversation the way a rest in music cuts through sound. Everyone looked at me. "I would like to say a few words," I said. Nicole smiled. "Of course, Daddy." I looked around the table. At Nicole, whose cream blouse reflected the candlelight. At Brandon, whose smile had already begun to thin. At Melody, whose dark eyes were steady. At Dolores, whose hands rested flat on the table, calm and ready. At Reverend Clay, who gave me a single nod so slight that no one else would have noticed. At Martha, who folded her napkin and set it beside her plate. "When Catherine was alive," I began, "she used to say that a family is like a piano. Every member is a string. When one string is out of tune, You can hear it in every note the instrument plays. You cannot hide it. You cannot cover it with louder playing. The only honest thing to do is stop and fix it. Nicole's smile held, but her eyes shifted. Just slightly. The way a shadow moves when the light source changes direction. I have spent the last few weeks listening very carefully, I continued. And I have heard some things that are out of tune. Brandon set his fork down. It made a small sound against the plate. A tiny metallic note that hung in the air. I looked at the empty chair beside me. Catherine's chair. The water glass caught the light from the candle in the center of the table and cast a small, bright circle on the wall behind it, like a spotlight waiting for someone to step into it. Before I continue, I said, I would like to introduce someone who could not be here tonight, but who planned to be here long before any of us sat down at this table. I turned toward the workshop door and opened it. Nathaniel Carr stepped into the dining room. He was wearing a dark gray suit and carrying the leather binder under his arm. He nodded politely to the table, pulled out the chair next to Dolores, and sat down. Nicole stared at him. Her wine glass was halfway to her lips, frozen in midair. "Who is this?" she said. It was not a question. It was a warning. "This is Nathaniel Carr," I said. "He is Catherine's attorney, and he has something to show all of you." I sat back down. Nathaniel opened the binder, and the room changed temperature. Nathaniel placed the leather binder flat on the table and opened it to the first tab. He did not rush. He did not raise his voice. He spoke the way a surgeon works, with steady hands and absolute precision. "My name is Nathaniel Carr," he said. "I am an attorney specializing in estate and elder law. I was retained by Catherine Simmons 14 months before her death to establish and manage a protected trust on behalf of her husband, Harold Simmons. What I am about to present is a summary of that trust and the circumstances that made it necessary." Nicole set her wineglass down. The stem clinked against the edge of her plate, and the sound rang through the silence like a cracked bell. "Daddy," she said. "What is this? Why is there a lawyer at our dinner?" I did not answer. Nathaniel continued. He turned the binder toward Nicole and pointed to the first document. It was the trust declaration, 23 pages, notarized and witnessed. He summarized it in plain language. Catherine had composed music under the pen name C. Magnolia for over a decade. Her compositions had been licensed for independent films, documentaries, streaming platforms, and public radio. The total royalty income, accumulated over 12 years, was $1.6 million. This money was held in the C. Magnolia Trust, a legally separate entity that could not be accessed, claimed, or redirected by anyone other than Harold Simmons, with Nathaniel Carr serving as trustee. Nicole blinked. Her mouth opened, then closed. Brandon leaned forward in his chair, and I watched his eyes move across the numbers the way a gambler's eyes move across a betting line. 1.6 million, Brandon said quietly, almost to himself. Nathaniel did not acknowledge him. He turned to the second tab. "This," he said, "is the estate structure. 2 years before her death, Catherine worked with me to restructure ownership of the Simmons residence and the piano collection. Both assets are now held in a family-limited partnership. I am the managing partner. No sale, mortgage, transfer, or liquidation of any asset within this partnership can occur without my written authorization." He paused and looked directly at Nicole. "This means," he said, "that the house cannot be sold. The pianos cannot be sold. Not by you. Not by anyone acting on your behalf. Not under any circumstance, including a court-appointed conservatorship, because the assets are not in Harold's individual name. They belong to the partnership." Nicole's face did not move, but her color changed. It drained from her cheeks the way water drains from a cracked vase. Slowly and completely. Brandon gripped the edge of the table with both hands. His knuckles were white. Nathaniel turned to the third tab. "On September 14th of last year," he said, "a preliminary petition for a competency evaluation of Harold Simmons was filed with the Chatham County Probate Court by the law firm of Draper and Munoz in Pooler, Georgia. The petition was initiated at the request of Nicole Hale, née Simmons. He placed a photocopy of the petition on the table. Nicole's signature was at the bottom, clear and unmistakable. This petition, Nathaniel continued, seeks to establish that Harold Simmons is mentally incapable of managing his own financial and legal affairs, and to appoint Nicole Hale as his legal conservator. If granted, it would give Nicole full authority over Harold's bank accounts, real property, and personal assets. He let the document sit on the table. Nobody touched it. Nobody moved. Reverend Clay folded his hands in his lap. Martha pressed her lips together and looked down at her plate. Dolores sat perfectly still, her eyes on Nicole, her expression unreadable. Melody stared at her mother across the table with an expression that was neither anger nor sadness, but something harder and more permanent, like a scar that has finished healing. Nathaniel turned to the fourth tab. Over the past 9 months, he said, a licensed private investigator retained by Catherine Simmons has been monitoring the financial activities of Nicole Hale and Brandon Hale. The findings are as follows. He read from the report without inflection, letting the facts carry their own weight. Brandon Hale maintains active accounts on 6 online gambling platforms, including 2 offshore platforms registered in Antigua. Total documented losses over the past 3 years are $190,000. He has refinanced his vehicle twice, taken out a high-interest personal loan of $35,000 from a lender in Jacksonville, Florida, and is currently 4 months in arrears on that loan. A lien has been placed on an unregistered boat purchased in 2022. Brandon opened his mouth. No sound came out. Nicole Hale, Nathaniel continued, has co-signed 2 of these loans. Her name appears on the offshore gambling account in Antigua. In March of last year, she transferred $12,000 from a joint savings account, originally funded by Catherine Simmons for Melody's college education, into that offshore account. Melody's head turned slowly toward her mother. Nicole did not look back. She was staring at the trust document as if she could burn a hole through it with her eyes. Additionally, Nathaniel said, Catherine Simmons documented a 6-year pattern of unauthorized financial activity by Nicole Hale, including withdrawals from a shared emergency account totaling $14,000, a forged signature on a household check, and a credit card opened in Catherine Simmons's name without her knowledge or consent, on which $28,000 in charges were accumulated. One of those charges was a consultation fee paid to the law firm of Draper and Munoz for preliminary advice regarding a conservatorship filing. He closed the 4th tab and looked at me. I nodded. Nathaniel turned to the 5th and final tab. He did not open it. Instead, he placed his hand flat on the binder and spoke to the entire table. The final piece of evidence, he said, is not a document. It is a recording. Catherine Simmons made this recording 5 months before her death, in full knowledge of her diagnosis, of sound mind and acting voluntarily. She asked that it be played for her family when the time came. He looked at me again. Harold, he said, whenever you are ready. I stood up. I walked to the workshop door and brought out my laptop. I placed it on the table, beside Catherine's empty chair, and turned the screen so that everyone could see it. I pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The image was slightly grainy, the way home videos always are, as if the camera knew it was recording something too intimate for high definition. The workshop appeared first. The high windows, the tool racks, the sawdust caught in a beam of afternoon light. Then the Steinway, black and patient, filling the center of the frame. Catherine walked into view from the left side of the screen. She was thin. Thinner than I remembered from that time, because memory has a way of filling in the spaces that illness takes away. She wore a blue scarf over her head and a cream cardigan that hung loose on her shoulders. Her hands, though, were steady. She pulled back the bench, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys without playing. She looked directly into the camera. The room went absolutely still. Nicole's breathing stopped. Brandon's hands, which had been gripping the table, went slack. Melody pressed her palms flat against her thighs. Dolores closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Reverend Clay bowed his head slightly, the way he might at the beginning of a prayer. Martha reached for his hand. "Hello," Catherine said. Her voice was clear and warm, the voice of a woman who had rehearsed what she was about to say, but had chosen to mean every word, as if she were saying it for the first time. "If you are watching this, then things have gone the way I was afraid they would. I hoped I was wrong. I spent years hoping I was wrong, but I am a woman who reads patterns, and the pattern was clear a long time ago." She paused. Her eyes moved slightly, as if she were looking at each person in the room through the screen, one by one. "Harold," she said, "my love, you are the most honest man I have ever known. You build things with your hands, and you trust people with your heart. And those two qualities made me fall in love with you 47 years ago. But they also made you vulnerable. You see the best in everyone, even when the best is not there. That is not a flaw. It is a grace. But grace without protection is just an open door." Nicole made a sound. It was small, barely audible, like the first crack in a piece of wood before it splits. She pressed her hand over her mouth. Catherine continued. "Nicole," she said, "I am your mother. I carried you for 9 months. I held you the night you were born, and promised you everything I had. I kept that promise. Every single day, I kept it. But somewhere along the way, you decided that what I gave you was not enough. And instead of asking for more, you started taking." Catherine's voice did not waver. It did not rise. It held steady, the way a well-tuned string holds its pitch, even when the room shakes. "I know about the credit card," she said. "I know about the checks. I know about the emergency account. I know about the lawyer and pooler. And I know about Brandon's gambling. I know all of it, Nicole. I have known for years. I did not confront you, because confrontation would have given you time to cover your tracks. Instead, I built something. I built a wall around your father that you cannot climb over, dig under, or knock down. Every dollar I earned under my pen name, every legal document I signed, every recording I made, was a brick in that wall." She turned her head slightly toward the camera, as if adjusting her gaze to reach someone sitting farther away. "Brandon," she said, "I do not know you well. I do not think you are evil. I think you are weak. And I think weakness, when it is fed by desperation, becomes something very close to cruelty. You married my daughter, and then you dragged her into a hole that neither of you can climb out of without someone else's money. That someone was supposed to be Harold. It will not be." Brandon stared at the screen. His jaw was tight. A muscle in his cheek twitched once, twice, like a wire under tension. Catherine looked down at the keys for a moment. When she looked up again, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Melody," she said, "my beautiful girl, you are the reason I did not give up. Every Thursday, when I sat in Dolores's shop and worked on these plans, I thought about you. I thought about the woman you are becoming. I thought about the world you will walk into, and I wanted to make sure that world still had your grandfather in it, whole and free, and surrounded by music." Melody's eyes were streaming. She did not wipe her face. She did not look away from the screen. She sat perfectly still, the way she always sat when she was listening to something that mattered more than comfort. Catherine placed her hands on the keys. "I wrote one last piece," she said. "I called it For Harold, After the Storm. I am going to play it now. And when it is finished, I want you to know that every note is a word I did not get to say out loud. Every chord is a year I wish we had more of. And every rest, every silence between the notes, is me standing beside you, even when you cannot see me." She began to play. The music was unlike anything I had ever heard from her. It started low and slow, in the bass register, with a melody that moved like water over stones. Then it climbed, note by note, into the middle range, where it became warmer, more complex, layered with harmonies that seemed to breathe on their own. It built and built, not with volume but with depth, the way grief builds when it finally finds a place to land. And then, in the final measures, it resolved into a single sustained chord that hung in the air like the last light of a long day. The video ended. The screen went black. The laptop sat on the table beside the empty chair. Silent. No one moved. No one spoke. The candle in the center of the table flickered once, as if someone unseen had leaned close to blow it out, and then changed her mind. The silence lasted 11 seconds. I know because I counted. When the world falls apart, you hold on to whatever structure you can find, and for me, that was counting. 1, 2, 3. The candle flame straightened. 4, 5. The refrigerator hummed from the kitchen. 6, 7. Martha's hand tightened around the reverend's. 8, 9. Dolores exhaled through her nose, slow and measured. 10, 11. Nicole broke first. She pushed her chair back and stood up. Her face was white. Not pale. White. The color of paper. The color of bone. Her hands were shaking, and she pressed them against the table to steady herself. But the trembling moved through her arms and into her shoulders, and she could not stop it. "That is not real," she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. She said it again, louder. "That is not real. You made that. Someone edited that. Mom would never say those things. She would never do that to me." Nobody answered her. The room held its shape, the way a room holds its shape after a window breaks. Everything was still in place, but the air had changed. Brandon stood up next. He did not speak to me. He did not speak to Nathaniel. He looked at Nicole, and his face carried the expression of a man who has just realized that the building he is standing in is on fire and every exit is locked. "We need to leave," he said. "Nicole, we need to leave right now." Nathaniel spoke without standing. His voice was calm and level, the voice of a man who has delivered difficult truths in rooms like this many times before. "Mr. Hale," he said, "I would advise you to stay. What I am about to explain affects your legal standing directly, and leaving this room will not change that." Brandon stopped. His hand was on the back of Nicole's chair. His fingers gripped the wood so hard I could see the tendons in his wrist. Nathaniel opened the binder to a final section, one he had not yet shown. It contained a single document, 3 pages long, printed on legal paper with a blue border. "This," Nathaniel said, "is a formal complaint prepared for submission to the Georgia Division of Aging Services, Adult Protective Services Unit. It details a pattern of attempted financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, Harold Simmons, age 71, by his daughter Nicole Hale and her husband Brandon Hale. The complaint is supported by documentary evidence, including forged financial instruments, unauthorized account access, misappropriation of funds designated for a minor, and a fraudulent petition for conservatorship." He paused. "This complaint has not yet been filed," he said. "Whether it is filed depends on what happens in the next 72 hours. Nicole sat back down. She did not choose to sit. Her legs simply stopped holding her. She dropped into the chair the way a puppet drops when the strings are cut. Sudden and graceless and complete. Brandon remained standing. His mouth moved, but the words came out thin and dry, like leaves scraping across concrete. "You cannot do this," he said. "This is a private family matter." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Financial exploitation of an elderly person is not a private family matter, Mr. Hale. It is a criminal offense under Georgia Code, Section 16, 5, 102. The penalties include imprisonment for up to 20 years, restitution, and civil forfeiture." The evidence in this binder is more than sufficient to support a criminal referral. The room pressed down on all of us. I could feel it in my chest. A weight that was not grief and not anger, but something in between. Something that tasted like iron and smelled like old wood and sounded like a chord that refuses to resolve. Melody had not moved. She sat in her chair with her hands in her lap, tears still wet on her cheeks, her eyes fixed on a point somewhere between her mother and the empty chair where Catherine should have been. She looked like a girl standing on a bridge between two countries, unable to go back, uncertain of what lay ahead. I looked at her, and she looked at me, and in that moment I saw Catherine so clearly that my breath caught. The same jaw, the same stillness before speech, the same way of holding pain at arm's length without pretending it did not exist. Melody stood up. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at Brandon. She walked around the table to the workshop door, opened it, and went inside. Through the doorway, I could see her pull the canvas cover off the Steinway. She sat down at the bench and lifted the fallboard. She began to play the first notes of For Harold. After the storm filled the house the way light fills a room when the curtains are pulled open at dawn. Slowly, completely, reaching into every corner, every shadow, every crack in the plaster, and every space between the floorboards. The melody rose from the bass register, climbed through the middle range, and opened into those breathing harmonies that Catherine had written in the last months of her life. Melody played it from memory. She had learned it from the USB drive, practiced it in secret, and carried it inside her the way her grandmother had carried the plan. Note by note, measure by measure. A 16-year-old girl playing a dead woman's final composition on a piano her grandfather had built with his own hands in a workshop that smelled like spruce and lacquer and 43 years of love. Nicole was crying. Not the performative tears she had used at Christmas. Real tears. The kind that come from a place so deep they do not make a sound. They ran down her face and fell onto the cream blouse and left dark circles that spread slowly into the fabric like ink into paper. Brandon sat down. He put his face in his hands. The room was full of music. When Melody reached the final chord, she held it. She held it the way Catherine had held it in the video, letting the sound sustain until it became silence, and letting the silence become something larger than sound. Then she lifted her hands from the keys and whispered, loud enough for everyone to hear, "That was from Grandma. She wanted you to listen." The house emptied slowly. Brandon left first. He stood up without a word, walked to the front door, and stepped into the night. He did not take his coat. He did not say goodbye. He moved the way people move when they are trying to outrun something that is already inside them. Nicole followed a few minutes later. She stopped at the door and turned to look at me. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. She closed it, pressed her lips together, and walked into the dark after her husband. I heard the car start. I heard the tires roll across the gravel. Then, silence. Melody stayed. She was still sitting at the Steinway, her hands resting on the closed fallboard, her eyes half shut. Dolores brought her a glass of water and sat beside her on the bench without speaking. Reverend Clay and Martha stood in the living room. The Reverend placed his hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and warm, and he held it there for a long time before he spoke. "You did a hard thing tonight, Harold," he said. "And you did it with dignity. Catherine would be proud." Martha hugged me. She smelled like fig preserves and linen, and her arms were stronger than they looked. They left quietly, closing the door behind them the way you close the lid of a piano after the last note has faded. Gently, with respect for what just happened inside. Nathaniel gathered the binder and placed it in his briefcase. He told me he would begin the preemptive legal filing on Monday morning. The APS complaint would be held for 72 hours, as he had stated at the table. If Nicole and Brandon cooperated, it would remain unfiled. If they did not, it would go to the Division of Aging Services by Wednesday. He shook my hand and said, "Call me if you need anything, even if it is just to talk." Then he left, and it was just me and Melody and Dolores, in a house that smelled like shrimp and candle wax and something else I could not name, something that felt like the air after a thunderstorm, clean and raw and still trembling. Dolores made coffee. She used the old percolator Catherine kept on the top shelf, the one I had not touched in 2 years because the sound of it bubbling reminded me of Sunday mornings I could not get back. Dolores found it without asking where it was. She knew this kitchen. She had known Catherine in it. She poured 3 cups and set them on the table. Melody came in from the workshop and sat in Catherine's chair. It was the first time anyone had sat there since the funeral. I did not say anything. It felt right. We drank coffee in silence. The clock above the stove ticked. The magnolia tree outside scratched against the window. Somewhere in the distance, a train sounded its horn, long and low. The kind of sound that carries for miles over flat ground and makes you think about all the places you have never been. Dolores reached into her bag and placed the red envelope on the table, the one she had given me at the shop. For Harold. Open with Nathaniel. I had not opened it. In all the preparation, all the planning, all the days leading up to tonight, I had carried it in my jacket pocket like a talisman, waiting for the right moment. This is the right moment, Dolores said. Catherine wanted you to open it after the dinner, after the truth was out. She said you would know what to do with it. I picked up the envelope. The wax seal was dark red, stamped with a small magnolia blossom. Catherine had always loved wax seals. She said they turned ordinary paper into a promise. I broke the seal carefully, the way I would lift the lid of a newly finished piano, with anticipation and reverence and the faintest edge of fear. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice, cream-colored stationery, Catherine's handwriting, small and precise, with that slight forward lean. I unfolded it and read, "My dearest Harold, if you are reading this, then the storm has passed, and you are still standing. I knew you would be. You are the strongest man I have ever known. Not because you fight, but because you build. You build pianos. You build trust. You build a life out of patience and sawdust and love, and you never once asked for applause. I am sorry I kept secrets from you. I am sorry I did not tell you about the music, about Dolores, about the trust. I was afraid that if you knew, you would try to fix things with kindness. And kindness alone was not enough to stop what was coming. So I became your architect. I drew the blueprints. I laid the foundation. And I asked the people I trusted most to help me build a house around you that no one could tear down. But this letter is not about the trust or the law or the money. This letter is about what comes next. I have one more gift for you, Harold. It is a list. I call it 40 Songs I Wish We Had Played Together. Each song is something I wanted us to do but never got the chance. Some are small, some are big, some are silly. All of them are real. Number 1. Drink Cuban coffee in Little Havana at sunrise. Number 2. Take the train from New Orleans to Chicago and do not sleep the whole way. Number 3. Build a piano for a school that cannot afford one. Number 4. Eat beignets in the French Quarter with powdered sugar on your shirt. Number 5. Start a music scholarship in my name. The list continued on the back of the page. 40 items, written in Catherine's steady hand. Some made me smile. Number 12 was learn to make gumbo without burning the roux. Number 23 was dance in the kitchen again, even if it is alone. Number 37 was tell Melody she is extraordinary, because I will not be there to tell her myself. I set the letter on the table. Melody picked it up and read it. When she finished, she set it down and placed her hand on top of mine. We are going to do all of them, she said. Every single one. Dolores smiled. It was the first real smile I had seen from her. Wide and warm, and full of something that looked like relief. I looked at the list. 40 songs, 40 reasons to keep going. Catherine had given me a map for the rest of my life. Written in her own hand, sealed with wax, and hidden inside a plan that took her years to build. I picked up my coffee and drank. It was still warm. The weeks that followed moved like a slow fugue, each voice entering one at a time, building towards something I could not yet hear clearly but could feel assembling in the distance. Nathaniel filed the preemptive challenge on Monday morning, 6 days before the competency evaluation deadline. The filing included Catherine's trust documents, the estate shield, the documented pattern of financial exploitation, Garrett's investigative report, and Catherine's recorded testimony. The Chatham County Probate Court received it at 9:15 in the morning. By 4 that afternoon, the judge assigned to Nicole's conservatorship petition had requested a conference with both parties. The conference took place the following Thursday. Nathaniel attended on my behalf. I was not required to be present, and he advised me to stay home. Not because I was fragile, but because, as he put it, the evidence speaks louder without emotion in the room. Nicole was represented by an attorney from Draper and Munoz, a young man named Corbin who, according to Nathaniel, turned visibly pale when the trust documents were introduced. The petition for conservatorship was withdrawn that same day. The judge noted on the record that the petitioner's counsel had conceded insufficient basis for proceeding and that the respondent's financial and legal affairs appeared to be managed competently and independently. Nathaniel told me this over the phone. I was standing in the workshop when I heard the words, "sanding the rim of a new piano" I had started building the day after the dinner. I set down the sandpaper, sat on the workbench stool, and let the air leave my lungs the way sound leaves a bell after the last strike, slowly, with a tremor that fades into stillness. The APS complaint was filed 2 weeks later. Not because Nicole and Brandon refused to cooperate, but because Nathaniel and Garrett agreed that a formal record was necessary to prevent future attempts. The Division of Aging Services opened an investigation. It lasted 3 months. During that time, Nicole was required to surrender her key to my house, close the unauthorized credit card in Catherine's name, and provide a full accounting of every withdrawal from the shared emergency account. Brandon's financial exposure was worse. The investigation revealed that his gambling debts had triggered 2 additional liens, one on a storage unit in Pooler and one on a timeshare in Myrtle Beach that he had purchased without Nicole's knowledge. His personal loan from Jacksonville went into default, and the lender filed suit. Garrett told me that Brandon had started attending a gambling addiction program, not voluntarily, but as a condition of a separate civil settlement Nicole had negotiated to avoid seizure of their joint assets. I did not enjoy any of this. I want to be clear about that. There is no pleasure in watching your daughter's life come apart, even when she is the one who pulled the threads. Nicole was my child. I had held her the day she was born, felt her fingers wrap around my thumb, and believed, the way all fathers believe, that the world would be kind to her because I would teach her to be kind to it. Somewhere between that day and this one, something had broken. I did not know when. I did not know why. I only knew that the sound was wrong and that Catherine had heard it before I did. Nicole and I did not speak for the first 2 months. Then, in late February, she called. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in the workshop, applying the first coat of lacquer to the new piano's soundboard. The phone rang, and her name appeared on the screen, and I stood there with a brush in one hand and the phone in the other, lacquer dripping onto the floor, for 9 rings before I answered. She did not apologize, not in words. She said, "Daddy, can I come see you?" And I said, "Yes." And that was enough for now. She came the following Saturday. She stood in the doorway of the workshop and looked at the new piano the way someone looks at a house they used to live in. She did not touch it. She asked what kind of wood it was, and I told her. Sitka spruce soundboard, sugar maple bridge, ebony sharps. She nodded and said, "Mom would have liked this one." I said, "She would have told me the treble needs more warmth." Nicole almost smiled. She did not stay long. She left before dark, but she came back the next Saturday and the one after that. She never mentioned the dinner. She never mentioned the trust, or the petition, or Brandon's debts. She just sat on the stool in the corner of the workshop, the same stool Catherine used to sit on, and watched me work. Sometimes she asked questions. Sometimes she just listened to the sound of the tools moving across the wood. In April, the court issued its final ruling. Nicole received 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory financial counseling. The unauthorized credit card charges were classified as identity theft. Because Catherine was deceased, the restitution was assigned to the C. Magnolia Trust to be used at the trustee's discretion. Brandon received a separate judgment for his role in the conservatorship scheme, including a fine of $15,000 and a 12-month supervised financial management order. Nathaniel called to inform me of the ruling. Then he said something else. "Harold, there is a second red envelope." I felt the air shift. "Catherine left it with me," he said. "She instructed me to give it to you only after the legal proceedings were complete. I have it in my office. Can you come by tomorrow?" I set down the voicing needle I had been holding. Outside the workshop window, the magnolia tree was blooming. White petals, wide and heavy, glowing in the late afternoon light. Catherine had planted that tree. Its roots went deep, its branches reached high. And every spring, without fail, it opened itself to the sky, as if it had never known a winter. "I will be there at 9, I said. The second red envelope was smaller than the first. Same cream-colored stationery. Same wax seal with the magnolia blossom. But this one was lighter, as if Catherine had distilled everything she had left to say into the fewest possible words. I opened it at Nathaniel's desk. He sat across from me, hands folded, saying nothing. Inside was a single card, the size of a postcard, written on both sides in Catherine's handwriting. "Harold, the first envelope was the plan. This one is the permission. You have spent your whole life building things for other people. Pianos for musicians, a home for our family, a workshop full of instruments that carry your fingerprints on every surface. But you have never built anything just for yourself. It is time. Take the trust money. Use it. Not to save, not to protect, not to defend. Use it. To create something that sings. Start with number 5 on the list. A music scholarship. Give it my name. Let it grow. Let it reach the kids who hear music in their heads, but cannot afford to let it out through their hands. And Harold, one more thing. The piano you are building right now, the one I know you started, because you always start building when you need to think. Give it away. Give it to a school. Give it to a church. Give it to someone who will play it every day and never know the man who made it, but who will feel, in every note, that someone cared enough to get it right. I love you. I always will. Now go play. Catherine." I folded the card and put it back in the envelope. I held it against my chest for a moment. Nathaniel looked out the window and gave me the privacy of his silence. I started with number 5. Nathaniel and I spent 3 weeks designing the scholarship. We called it the Catherine Simmons Music Scholarship. It would be funded by the C. Magnolia Trust, administered through a partnership between Nathaniel's office and Dolores's shop, and awarded annually to one student in the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System who demonstrated exceptional musical ability and financial need. The award covered 4 years of private instruction, instrument access, and a $5,000 annual stipend for music-related expenses. Dolores volunteered to manage the application process. She converted the back room of Magnolia Sound into a small audition space, with a borrowed upright piano, 2 folding chairs, and a microphone connected to a recording device so that every audition could be archived. She hung Catherine's photograph on the wall beside the door. The same photograph from Nathaniel's file. The one of Catherine and Dolores standing in front of the shop, both of them laughing. The first applicant arrived in May. His name was Marcus Delano. He was 14 years old, tall and thin, with oversized glasses and hands that looked like they had been designed for a keyboard. He lived with his grandmother in a duplex on the west side of town, He had been playing piano since he was 6, taught by a church organist who recognized his talent and gave him free lessons every Wednesday after school. He had never owned a piano. He practiced on a donated electric keyboard with 3 dead keys and a sustain pedal held together with electrical tape. Marcus sat down at the borrowed upright in Dolores's back room and played a Chopin ballade from memory. He played it the way Melody played Catherine's last piece, with his eyes closed and his body still, as if the music was not coming from his fingers, but passing through them from somewhere deeper. When he finished, Dolores was crying. I was not, but only because I had learned, over the past 6 months, that some emotions are too large for tears. They sit in your chest like a sustained chord and do not resolve. They just hold. Marcus became the first Catherine Simmons scholar. I gave him the piano I had been building, the one I started the day after the dinner. Sitka spruce soundboard, sugar maple bridge, ebony sharps. I delivered it to his grandmother's duplex on a Saturday morning in June. It barely fit through the front door. Marcus's grandmother stood in the hallway with her hand over her mouth, and Marcus sat down and played the first 8 bars of the same Chopin ballad, and the sound filled that small house the way Catherine's perfume used to fill ours, completely and without apology. Number 1 on the list came next. Melody and I drove to Miami in July. We arrived in Little Havana at sunrise and sat at a counter on Calle Ocho and drank Cuban coffee so strong it made my teeth vibrate. Melody laughed and said Grandma would have ordered a second cup. I ordered a second cup. Number 4. We took a detour through New Orleans on the way home. We ate beignets at Café du Monde, and I got powdered sugar on my shirt, exactly as Catherine had prescribed. Melody took a photograph of the stain and said she was going to frame it. Number 12. I learned to make gumbo. It took 4 attempts. The first 3 times, I burned the roux. The 4th time, I stood at the stove for 45 minutes, stirring without stopping, the way I stir grits, the way I sand wood, the way I do everything that matters, slowly and with full attention. The roux turned the color of dark chocolate. The gumbo was thick and rich and tasted like something Catherine would have nodded at once and then asked for more salt. In August, Melody received a letter. It came in a large white envelope with a return address in Charleston. The letterhead read Charleston Academy of Music, and the first line said, Dear Miss Simmons, we are pleased to offer you early admission to our preparatory program beginning in the fall semester. She read it standing in the kitchen, barefoot, in the exact spot where Catherine used to stand when she hummed in the morning. She looked up at me. Her dark eyes were bright and wet and fierce. Grandpa, she said. I got in. I know, I said. Your grandmother knew too. On the last Saturday evening in September, I made gumbo. The real kind. Dark roux, andouille sausage, okra, shrimp from the same fisherman on Tybee Island, and a bay leaf that I dropped in the pot the way Catherine used to, with a small flick of the wrist, as if she were tossing a coin into a fountain and making a wish. The table was set for 5. Harold at the head. Melody on the right, her Charleston Academy acceptance letter, pinned to the refrigerator behind her, with a magnolia-shaped magnet. Dolores beside her, wearing the apron with the embroidered blossoms. Marcus Delano at the far end, still looking slightly astonished to be sitting at the table of the man who built his piano, and on the left, the empty chair. Catherine's chair. A plate, a glass of water, and a single white magnolia blossom I had cut from the tree that morning. Dolores brought bread pudding. She set it on the counter beside the stove and looked at me with an expression that had become familiar over the past months, a mixture of warmth and quiet sadness, and something else that I could only describe as completion. She had kept her promise to Catherine. Every part of it. And now, standing in this kitchen, surrounded by the smell of gumbo and the sound of Melody laughing at something Marcus had said, she looked like a woman who had finally set down something very heavy. We ate slowly. The gumbo was good. Not perfect. The okra was slightly overcooked, and I had added too much cayenne, but nobody complained. Marcus ate 3 bowls and asked for the recipe. Melody told him the recipe was classified and that he would have to earn it. Dolores smiled and said Catherine would have given it to him for free because Catherine believed that food, like music, should never be locked away. After dinner, I stood up and raised my glass. It was water. Plain water. Catherine always said the best toasts are made with whatever is in your hand, because the words matter more than the glass. I would like to say something, I said. The table went quiet. Not the sharp, cold quiet of the dinner in December. This was a different kind of silence. Warm. Open. The kind of silence that exists between 2 notes in a slow melody, full of space and breath, and the knowledge that something beautiful is about to follow. 6 months ago, I said, I sat at a table where my own daughter forgot to give me a gift. I thought that was the worst night of my life. I was wrong. It was the first night of a new one. I looked at the empty chair. Catherine built me a fortress, I said. She built it out of music and law and love, and she hid it inside a piano because she knew that was the one place I would always return to. She could not be here tonight, but she is in this room. She is in the bread pudding Dolores made from her recipe. She is in the magnolia tree outside that window. She is in the scholarship that will carry her name long after all of us have left this table. And she is in every note Melody plays, because Melody has her hands and her ears and her stubborn, beautiful refusal to look away from the truth. Melody's eyes were wet. She did not wipe them. She just held my gaze the way she had held it that Christmas night, steady and certain and unbreakable. I set down my glass. Come on, I said to Melody. Let us play something. We walked to the workshop together. The night air was cool and carried the scent of river, water, and magnolia. The workshop lights hummed when I flipped the switch. The Steinway sat in the center of the room, uncovered now, its black surface reflecting the overhead bulbs. The cathedral. Catherine's piano. The instrument that had held her secrets and her voice and her final composition inside its body like a heart holds blood. Melody sat on the left side of the bench. I sat on the right. We did not discuss what to play. We did not need to. She placed her hands on the keys, and I placed mine beside hers, and we began. It was not a composed piece. It was not written down. It was a conversation. The kind that only happens between 2 people who have been through something together and come out the other side, still listening. Melody played a phrase. I answered it. She shifted the key. I followed. We moved through major and minor, through fast passages and slow ones, through moments of dissonance that resolved into something clear and bright, and through silences that were not empty but full. The way a rest in music is never truly silent, because the ear is still holding the memory of what came before. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching. Dolores leaned against the workbench with her arms crossed and her eyes closed, listening the way Catherine used to listen, with her whole body. The magnolia tree outside the window held its white blossoms up to the dark sky, steady and patient, rooted in soil that had held this family for decades. We played for a long time. When we stopped, the last chord hung in the rafters and faded into the smell of spruce and lacquer, and the workshop was still. Melody looked at me. Grandma was right, she said. This piano does feel like praying. I put my arm around her shoulder. She leaned into me. And for the first time in a very long time, the house did not feel empty. If you are listening to this story, I want you to remember one thing. Protecting yourself is not betraying love. It is honoring it. Catherine taught me that. She taught me that love without protection is just an open door, and that the people who truly love you will spend their lives making sure that door has a lock, a key, and someone standing behind it who will never walk away. If someone in your life is being taken advantage of, speak up. If someone you love is building walls around you, let them. And if you find a music box on your nightstand that plays a song only you can hear, wind it every night. Because some songs do not end. They just wait for someone to keep playing. Thank you for listening. And if this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it.